So I want to talk to you about scaring voters, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you a couple of things. I'm mad as hell about it. I'm not going to pretend I'm not. I'm not going to pretend that it doesn't bother me, it doesn't shake me to my core that there are actual people, rich white people in America right now. When I say rich white people, I don't say that it's to vilify rich people or white people or rich people who happen to be white. But their social location will become important as I tell you why I'm mad as hell about scaring voters, because I recently came to know about a set of billboards that are placed in certain urban centers telling people that if you vote and you don't have the proper requirements to vote, then you could be, committing a felony or something like that. Scaring people, bullying people. Billboards put around. And just right off the bat, I'm like, ugh. Because that is so against the spirit of democracy, so against the spirit of the law, even voter laws. Now, as they exist, even in those states that have enacted those very narrow voter ID laws, you have people who have these billboards to enforce a law that is meant to enfranchise people. The spirit of the law is not to exclude people. Now, of course, what the law has to do is exclude people who shouldn't be able to vote. But the trick is, how do you ensure that the maximum amount of people can vote, that you enfranchise, you maximize your democracy. So that's the spirit of the law. So first, when you see such a billboard, such a statement, I think it should strike you. I think it should say to you that, you know what, indeed, they're acting in a very malice way. They're not acting to help people to vote. They're acting, as I said initially, bullying. We recognize that as bullying, and so then when you think, well, what does bullying have to do in this situation? Rather than, work with the spirit of the law and in the spirit of democracy, because the spirit of the law, in practice even, is to look for fraud, voter fraud. And so the instances of illegal voting that have happened, and there have been 7 in the state that these particular sets of scare tactics were used, there was no systematic sort of fraudulent activity. These were 7 individuals, different times, different places, which, given the concentration of an urban population, 7 is about reasonable. We don't want those 7 to even be voting. And we even want to know who those 7 are. Were they committing fraud? Were they, were they politically motivated or personally motivated? We want to look into that. But more so, we want to focus on enfranchising voters, getting people to the ballot. That is the spirit of democracy. And so when we see that is totally lacking in those kind of billboards, we have to see it as a form of intimidation. Now, the fact that these are the people who did that, it's a couple. It's not some organization. They themselves are not a conspiracy, but they become a conspiracy by the masses. Because when you have, in this instance, there were a man and a woman, a wealthy investor, served on several local boards. The wife, who was a homemaker, served on several local boards, including the arts, including the local ballet. And that scares me, because you think if someone is can use their money and power and connections, because they bought time on television, per se, they bought this commercial space, to even have the business connections, because someone allowed them to do that. Someone didn't report them to a local organization or the police to say that, they're participating in voter intimidation. So there are other people who, it wasn't just money that exchanged, but it was the handshake. And that's what I'm looking at here, is the handshake between this chain of individuals who, so they're going to put money into buying this intimidating board. But what do they do in their other aspects of their life? I said that the wife in this duo is on the ballet board. Now, as an artist myself, I'm like, okay, so this person is malice over here in their other lives. How are they malice over here, even in controlling the kinds of arts that a city gets to see, that gets produced? Because, even as a dancer, becomes a wall with your creativity. If you want to have funding, as in if you want to have space, if you want to have people to work with, if you want to have resources to support what you do, then certainly you're going to have to shake somebody's hand. And to think that that is the kind of person that is a patron of the arts, a dominant patron of the arts, it influences even what you get to see as arts, what you get to think of as arts. It makes me wonder. But back to this issue of the spirit of democracy, because I add those things to say that it is important to look at these people as individuals. I say the wife, I say the wealthy investment, the husband, banker, because I want to say that these are just individuals, well-connected individuals, but look at what they do with their money and power. Look at how they step on other people and work to disenfranchise other people as opposed to enfranchising. They're not building inclusivity, they're building a club of exclusivity. It's the same old elitism that we have been talking about, well, actually at the core of the American identity. So I think that when I say that that's what democracy is, I really am making a plea to the fact that this is the constitutionalist approach that President Obama has taken throughout his presidency. He even used the Constitution so swiftly. Let's get this now. Let's check this. He even got the health care bill passed, something that works phenomenally. I'll talk about the health care and universal health care in another video, and I realized that so-called Obama Cares, is not universal health care. But just look at how he got that passed. He used the Constitution so smoothly, so swiftly, that they even had to invoke every branch, the other two branches of government, just to figure out what the guy was up to. That's how swift he is. And he did that, how? Not through building a club of exclusivity, but by building coalitions around him. And then that's how you build public goods. In another video, I'll talk about infrastructure and investing in infrastructure and how that infrastructure as a public good, again, relates to the approach that Obama has, which is why I feel that we deserve 4 more years of that kind of leadership, and even an Uber Obama to appear from within the next 2 years, because what's coming next? There is no way that we're going back to that kind of conservatism. And that's what I mean, that kind of conservatism, when I talk about just 2 people who can have that kind of influence on entire communities, to post, to bully, to, put their stamp over entire urban communities of people. Now, I stress to you that it's important that you think about how would you feel just reading such a sign. If you do this, you'll be da-da-da. Have you ever had the experience of being told what you can't do as opposed to being told what you can do? Being disabled as opposed to being enabled? Being dispowered as opposed to empowered? I'm sure all of us can think back to a favorite teacher and a bad teacher. And if you think about their teaching methods or how that teacher was able to reach you at that time in your life, largely because the one that you liked was able to empower you, was able to make you feel like you could do something, that you had agency, that you could speak, that you could use a voice, that you could write, that you could express yourself. And the one that you didn't like, your breath stinks, sit down, shut up, that kind of thing, or just did not reach you on whatever level. That's the disenfranchising side. And so when we look at that, and you look at it, it does take malice to use that disenfranchisement language to speak about voting, to put your hand into voting. And that's what these 2 people are doing. They're putting their hands into this practice of democracy, both privately and through cash, under, in lobbying, but also publicly, using public space to impact a public right, a public, not just, I don't want to say privilege, but right. I mean, it is a responsibility more than anything in a democracy. And so to see this, I have to think back to, because I always think about the civil rights movement and how do those people who were black and disenfranchised, because I sometimes, well, I see a lot of people around me, black and disenfranchised, and see people in disenfranchising black and poor people. Well, I always think, where is the, how does their empathy get eroded? Where is that? Where does that malice come from? Where does that want to bully and intimidate come from? Where does that need come from? I question that deeply because, well, I'm confronted with it. We're all confronted with it. But how does it relate to me as also someone who votes just like them? Because between the three of us and you watching, we're just 4 votes, right? But they have money to actually bark as opposed to encourage people to vote. And we could think of millions of ways. We could brainstorm right here ways that they could, let's think about some ways that they could, encourage and enfranchise people. They could go to prisons when people are getting released, and they could help people fill out the forms so they could be, when I say fill out the forms, make them available, give people the information that once you've served your time, that in certain states, in most states actually, that you have the right to vote. They could go and encourage people to vote, right? They could go to, old folks' homes where people might have difficulties getting to polls. They could encourage them to either A, vote by absentee, or B, just, rent a van, and have them hauled over to the local, the local voting poll. You could even make sure that they're registered to vote, and if any of them have difficulty getting IDs voting, you could have all these sorts of resources that people could be encouraging one another to take hold of the spirit of democracy. But because of our personal agendas, and that's what it effectively comes down to, is that erosion of empathy, that selfishness, that me, mine matters more than yours. Now, of course, that means, and that's part of the conservative agenda, is you have to more narrowly define me, and mine, whereas you and yours just becomes larger and larger. More and more of you Americans are excluded from that billboard. More and more of you are intimidated. Well, I better make sure I have mine. I'm lucky I do. I have a driver's license. Obviously I live abroad, so I have a passport. I have other forms of ID. I have a birth certificate, an original one that my mother has kept since birth, and I even have, certified copies, on and on and on and on. Nobody's going to pay me to reveal my college transcripts to them. A job will, but not somebody like Trump to give me, millions and however many, hundreds of thousands he's going to give to some charity if he's going to bully Obama into revealing his college transcripts. No. You're going to pay Obama to give his, not even going to pay him, going to give money to charity. That's bullying. That's malice. That kind of egomaniac behavior is the thick and thick of the conservative agenda. And that so many disenfranchised white people have been bullied into voting for that. That so many disenfranchised poor people have been bullied into thinking that, they're rich, they must know what's right, they got the power, they must know what's going on. They get bullied into voting for them. And then when they start pushing a very narrow interpretation of the teachings of Jesus Christ, and then there again, of course, you see the religious conservatism, and the aspect of empathy erosion is actually quite clear, because in every aspect where they see difference, they take their turn to be exclusionary. No, you can't. No foreigners, who they'll always call illegals. No gays. No preteen mothers. No this, no that. No blacks. All this kind of stuff. No, as opposed to building any sense of what Jesus would have called a commune, a community, communitas. And it, like I said, it makes me, frankly, it makes me mad as hell. What can you do right now? Vote. What else can you do? Make sure the people around you are voting. If that means carting people off to the poll on polling day, do it. Call a few people. Hey, you got your stuff together? You want to vote? Let's go vote together. I used to always vote for my mother and my grandmother. My grandfather would always go in the morning before work. My father was an American for the time, immigrant, legal immigrant. Yeah, we would just vote with people. We would vote at the same place, so you even see people that you know. Unfortunately, when we moved to the other side of town, it was quite alienating. It was efficient, you know. But when I lived in the black community, it was just such a, it was a march. I mean, even just, you know, having to walk slowly with my mother and grandmother because they're older and walk slowly. My mother's disabled and walks more slowly. You really get the sense that you're doing a ritual. And I went with them even before I could vote. So you ask, what else can you do about this? When you go vote, you take a young person with you. You show them what you're doing. You show them how it's done. You take them into the poll and you be honest with them about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And if they have any questions, answer them. But you might want to have the discussion with them before you get in the actual booth. Amen.